Hello, and welcome to this month's episode of Diversability Amplified, the podcast where we elevate disabled stories and lives through conversation. This month, we are celebrating National Disability Employment Awareness Month, which is such a huge celebration and advocacy opportunity for our community. And we wanted to highlight that conversation today on the podcast with a couple of our community members. Before we get started, I want to introduce myself again, like I do every episode. I'm Catherine Lewis, the content manager for Diversability. I'm a Caucasian woman with medium-length dark black hair. I am sitting in my office chair, and behind me you can see some of my teaching tools that I use as a music teacher when I'm not doing advocacy work in accessibility. Before we get started with the conversation, I'd love for our guests, Erin and Jacob, to introduce themselves. Erin, can you introduce yourselves to our guests before we get started? This is Catherine. I'm done speaking.
Perfect. Catherine, thanks so much for having me on the show today. Hi guys, my name is Erin Noon-Kay. I'm the CEO and founder of Claiming Disability LLC. If you're not familiar with Claiming Disability LLC, we are a limited liability company located in Iowa City, Iowa, working to educate, advocate, and empower the disabled community through media projects like this podcast. I have my own, the official Claiming Disability podcast on Spotify, Anchor, iTunes. You guys can listen to it. I think it's pretty spectacular. This past month, I was lucky enough to interview Keith Jones. He just won an Emmy for the Netflix documentary. And I didn't do my image description really quick, but I am a fat, disabled woman with blonde hair and glasses, wearing an official Claiming Disability LLC t-shirt. This is pretty disabled and powerful. And I'll kind of go into those descriptors. Sometimes people are like, oh, fat, disabled. I'm like, I am both of those things, and I am fine with those descriptors. Again, just like Diversability preaches, Claiming Disability preaches that disability is not a bad word. And I'm really excited to be part of this podcast today. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Erin. Jacob, can you give us an intro of yourself before we jump into the conversation?
Sure, no problem. That was just my daughter that walked in and turned the lights off on me. Good times. Hey everyone, my name is Jacob Levy. I am a Caucasian male with brown hair, glasses, and a beard. I run a service called Searchable, where I help job seekers with disabilities target opportunities outside their network. I also educate job seekers with disabilities how to create content based on their subject matter expertise, resume revisions, LinkedIn optimizations, you name it, I'm on it. And I'm super excited to be here today. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jacob. This is Catherine. I think I forgot to actually mention that the theme of today's podcast episode, although it's all centered around INDEEM, we are focusing specifically on entrepreneurs with disabilities. And that's one of the big reasons why we asked Erin and Jacob to come on today, because as you heard in their intros, they both run their own organizations, as many of us do in the community. And we wanted to highlight entrepreneurship in the disabled community because it's really becoming a unique opportunity for employment for so many of us that wouldn't have had an opportunity to really have employment otherwise. So the first thing I would love to talk with both of you guys today about is how you really, I don't know, dare I say, stumbled upon or sought out entrepreneurship And did your identity as a disabled person influence that decision, or did it come before the two? Did it come organically, and how has it impacted your independence and livelihood as a disabled person? Erin, I would love to hear from you first on that.
Oh, you're just calling me out. I get to go first. Oh, well, I love that this month is about disabled entrepreneurship. You guys can look in my Instagram, Erin.claimingdisability.llc. I identify as a disabled entrepreneur. I really think it's important for me and my company. I use identity first language. And if you guys aren't familiar with identity first language, it's saying like disabled person, saying disabled human, as opposed to person with disabilities, which is person first. The reason why I personally don't use person first language as a disabled person is because before I became the CEO and founder of my own company, I worked government, nonprofit, and the education sector. So person first language is language traditionally embraced by nonprofit agencies and social services. And I found with my experience with those various agencies that it wasn't as representative of the disabled experience as you would think, working with a social service that has a mission statement of working with people with disabilities. In my case, I worked for NAMI, the National Alliance on Mental Illness, and that's a pretty big nonprofit, and I did fundraising and development. But again, in terms of the language we use to refer to disabled people, it was pretty dated. We would call them clients, and it was always really weird for me because I was a disabled person and I was providing services to the disabled community. So I respect people's preferences. Use person first, Catherine using person first, Jacob using person first. But me as a disabled brand, and I believe Tiffany as well. I think she started with her daily ableism talk series that she does. She started saying disabled people. I think it's really important as a disabled entrepreneur to make that distinction, because if you've been in the disabled community for any amount of time, you know that person first and identity first language kind of has that division. But the reason why I'm not afraid to claim my disability, as my company states with its name, Claiming Disability, is because to me, it empowers me to call myself a disabled entrepreneur. It empowers me to call myself a disabled employee. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the stats, but I'm going to say them anyway because they always blow my mind during National Disability Employment Awareness Month. What a name, am I right? But like, so there's only 17.9% of people who actually identify as being disabled in the workforce. So I'm being very meaningful with identity first language. I'm being very intentional of putting that out there, saying, hey, I'm pretty disabled and powerful, and I can still be an amazing employee. I can be an amazing CEO. I can connect with 4,000 disabled people across the world, and I can do it while being pridefully disabled, as my friend Marie always says. So I always kind of want to make that distinction. For me, Claiming Disability started as a podcast idea, honestly. I was just like, I want to have a project that's just mine, but claiming disability became so much more than just a podcast project. I realized people were interested in my merch and my messaging and what I had to say. So I became a company, a limited liability company, relatively shortly after that. And I've just been really surprised how receptive the disabled community is to claiming disability. And I think a lot of people, at least from what I've seen from other disability companies like Diversability, like, other organizations out here, there's a huge shift in terms of disability pride. I want to be on the cutting edge of that movement. Like, I want to be on the forefront of that movement because I think it's really powerful for our community. And so when I worked for NAMI, I did fundraising and development. I raised over $500,000 for people experiencing mental illness in Johnson County, where I live. And basically, I got to a point as a disabled employee where I realized that I wasn't going to be able to make any latitudinal move. I wasn't going to be able to move up. The executive director, she'd been there for a really long time and she had no intention of leaving. And when you don't feel like you're being respected or listened to as a disabled employee, Catherine, I'm not telling you anything you probably don't know, but I mean, it doesn't matter if you're disabled and working 60 hours a week. It doesn't matter if you're disabled and going to every after hours event. It doesn't matter if you're disabled and only getting paid $12 an hour, which I've totally been there. They're still going to look at you like you're disabled and you're not capable of being an executive director. So in my case, I was being denied those opportunities. So I'm like, I'm going to create my own opportunities. And that's where I really feel like entrepreneurship fits me, because I have been discriminated against for my disability. I'm very physically disabled. Tiffany, who is the CEO of this company, talks a lot about disclosing as a disabled person. I use a walker. I have a crooked spine. I use braces. I don't really have a choice to disclose my disability. And I can't say, like I always say on my own podcast, I can't say for sure that I was discriminated against solely because of my disability. All I can say is, as somebody who uses LinkedIn frequently and has over like 500 connections and a really pretty profile picture where I don't look disabled, people were always really excited to talk to me on the phone. They were like, oh my gosh, she has tech skills, she has grant writing skills, look at this little cutie here, like she's the whole package. But then when I rolled into the interview, disabled as hell, like the people were just like, and like literally, I mean, I always like to do that because that's literally what it is. It's like paper dropping, like people being totally caught off guard. And people are like, well, why don't you just disclose? Why don't you tell them that you have a disability? I'm like, because if I disclose, I won't get a call back. Sorry, not sorry, just being honest. Like,
it's so true, and that discrimination is real. And I'm kind of gathering that was really a motivation for you for becoming an entrepreneur. Do you mind if I ask Jacob his perspective and his story on why he became an entrepreneur, Erin?
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing that story, because I think it resonates with so many of us who have chosen to go the entrepreneurial route because of the opportunities that we weren't afforded, before we chose to make our, as you said, make our own opportunities. Jacob, Was your path to entrepreneurship similar, or was it a little bit different? Can you tell us a little bit about your experience and your journey towards entrepreneurship?
Sure. And Erin, thank you so much for your story. I feel like, even before we started recording, like your journey, in the public sector, it's still very similar to mine, because I feel like I'm still teetering between entrepreneurship, side hustle, whatever you want to call it, and the public sector. So I really resonated with Erin's story. So thank you. So yeah, I have a very diverse background. Like yourself, Catherine, I was an amateur jazz musician for like a decade. I went to school for music. Music is still very close to me. And then in terms of where entrepreneurship came, my career was kind of all over the place. I was doing a bunch of different odd jobs and everything. I became a special education teacher because a college professor showed me how music is used as a therapeutic tool for people with disabilities. That immediately piqued my interest. And even before that, I grew up with a learning disability due to hydrocephalus. Hydrocephalus is essentially a brain hemorrhage at birth. So I've always struggled with my memory retrieval. However, I could sit at a piano and you can play me any song you want and I will play it right back. My hearing was pretty off the charts. I don't have perfect pitch, but I have perfect relative pitch. So you can tell me the first note and I'll tell you all the other ones. And that was my strength. And so I figured out a way to use music to aid my own memory retrieval as a mnemonic device. And so then I figured out a way to build a community and use short melodies as a tool for memory retrieval, behavior management, and life skills for people with disabilities. So that was my first taste of entrepreneurship, just giving music lessons. And then I started modifying them, putting music and academia together. And then when I get in, to career coaching, that was more of a side hustle when I was looking for full-time work. I was doing some video editing, just things like that. I really like tinkering. I like tinkering with stuff. I was very into that. And then I put an ad in a Facebook group and another career coach reached out. He's like, I need some help with some videos, blah, blah, blah. And so if push comes to shove, I basically learned his process of how to become a career coach. And he actually took me on as a client, and we bartered for services. And he actually got me a job. And after that, he was like, well, do you want to just come work for me? And so I learned the ropes of how to be a career coach. And right before the pandemic, I worked for him for a few years. And right before the pandemic, I was like, there's a million coaches out there, but I don't think there's as many career coaches with disabilities helping people with disabilities. So that's when I decided I want to switch gears a little bit and stand on my own 2 feet, so to speak.
So that's a really interesting story to me, that you spent so much time in the private sector, and yet you have found a way to combine the two. A lot of times we talk about entrepreneurship and the public sector as if it's an all or nothing kind of thing. And I'm not sure that that's the case, especially for our community, because so much of the services and the advocacy work that is done involves the private sector, and yet so many of us see holes. Erin talked about how, these large nonprofit organizations, really weren't as cutting edge with accepting and understanding and embracing disability as we are kind of expectant of. And I'm curious, I know my own experience having worked with the nonprofit sector, having been a government employee, being an educator, and now an entrepreneur myself, that I saw a lot of holes in the nonprofit sector. And so it's what prompted me to become an entrepreneur. And then it was kind of interesting when I became an entrepreneur. It was a shift that I didn't expect, that there's an assumption that I didn't know existed, that if you're a person that works in the disabled community, especially if you are disabled yourself, you must be a nonprofit. And it's something that Diversability has had to deal with in the past as a business ourselves, full of entrepreneurs, that there's, even within the disabled community, there's an assumption that if you work in the disabled community, you must be a nonprofit. And it sets a kind of ugly precedent that disabled people and people that work with the disabled community don't deserve to get equitable pay and benefits and everything that comes with a business. Can you guys talk to me a little bit about your experiences with that? Have you noticed these kinds of assumptive, very conditioned beliefs about the nonprofit sector and entrepreneurship and the disabled community? Or is it something that you haven't had to really deal with as much? I'm really curious to hear your experiences on that.
I'm stoked. If you mind, I'll go first. Jacob, if you don't mind.
Ladies first.
Of course. I just want to dive right into this because, so I want to make a little bit of a clarification. I know my intro was a little messy. I'm a little bit of a messy person. I'm a messy entrepreneur.
Why we love you.
I'm a real person. I'm authentic. If I was going to do this business, I'm a huge fan of Gary Vaynerchuk, Mel Robbins, Tony Robbins, business owner, huge, large-scale business owners that get paid millions of dollars for speaking engagements. They're always preaching authenticity. And I'm like, if I'm going to really do this business, I have to be an authentic human being because I'm going to be perfectly honest. Yes, Catherine, I love the precedent you've set. I'm going to be perfectly honest here. When you're working nonprofit, government sector, educational sector, which I did work educational sector, I was a grant writer. So I wrote grants for after school programming. But you can't be your authentic self in a nonprofit, in a social service, in a government sector. I'm sorry. I don't know if we're supposed to say this or not, but I'm sorry. When you're working with a lot of different nonprofits, believe it or the interesting thing that there's a huge misconception about nonprofit, right? Because I worked nonprofit for 6 years and people were like, oh my goodness, you're so noble. Good for you. This is amazing. Nonprofit is this, okay, so a 501c3, which is a nonprofit business number, classification that the government gives you, runs the same as a business, just on a significantly tighter budget. Are we understanding here? Okay, so I worked in fundraising and development. So I definitely wasn't getting paid, what I was worth, or, there's kind of an expectation in nonprofit, right? You're supposed to give and give and give and give. And you're supposed to be a volunteer board member. You're supposed to go to all the events. You're supposed to give and give and give. And there's an entire book written about this. It's like the Disney model or whatever, but you have to understand why nonprofit burnout exists. You guys are talking about teacher burnout. It's the same thing with nonprofit. When you're being asked to work, 30 hours a week, 40 hours a week, 50 hours a week, 60 hours a week, which at one point I was in nonprofit. I was only contracted for 20 hours a week. So when you're only, yeah. So when you're only getting paid X amount of dollars, there's a huge societal guilt, and not to make Jacob feel weird or anything, but I think it's more existent with women in nonprofit, especially. I'm sorry, nonprofit is dominated by women because traditionally men don't take jobs that don't pay well. That's why when you go to conferences, it's like dominated by women. And so you have all these nonprofits, like I did grant writing, fundraising, and development. So it's ridiculously competitive in those markets because you have all these nonprofits fighting for dollars, all these nonprofits submitting RFPs and doing everything they need to do. I did sponsorships. Like, I'm sorry, like we had the NAMI Walk, which I was in charge of, like the NAMI Walks program. Every single nonprofit that I worked with in my area also had a walk. The Alzheimer's Association, the American Cancer Society, the hardest, I'm sorry, they all just, I had like trying to schedule a walk with like 25 other walks. Oh my God. And I'm not even going to get into the hilariousness of being a walk manager. That was officially my title, who couldn't walk. I use a walker, I'm disabled as hell, and I'm supposed to be advocating to people with mental illness that they need to exercise and be part of this walk to raise money, which I always said my motto with the walk and fundraising and donations was, it's not about the walk. I can't walk. Look at me. I'm disabled as hell. Like, I can't walk. It's not about walking. It's about helping your community and ending the stigma surrounding mental illness. So again, if you're willing to work on that narrative change, that actually opens the door for more funding and more opportunities. What I tended to see in nonprofit, particularly with fundraising, I'm just going to be honest, there was an assumption that clients and people who were disabled couldn't raise as much money as able-bodied people. So they weren't targeted, which anybody who works with able-bodied or disabled people knows how capable disabled people are of raising money, especially when they're really, really passionate about something. And we're missing a huge opportunity to hire disabled people. I take the bus. I take paratransit. I can't drive as a disabled person. Maybe that's something a lot of people here can relate to, but there's a fundamental misunderstanding of people who work in social services and the social services that are actually serving the community. So you have to think like a disabled person who uses the food bank or uses paratransit like I did is a huge asset to your nonprofit or organization versus, not hiring the disabled people, not hiring a disabled person. But the last thing I am going to say is, as a limited liability company myself, yes, I do have my license and I have to file taxes every month. It's a huge pain in the butt. But I did a little too soon. But yes, people assume that my organization is a nonprofit all the time. And I'm like, I would never do nonprofit because I've been in nonprofit, and you have to, construct a board. And a lot of times, so like the nonprofits that I have been involved with, you have somebody with a core mission, that's really strong. And then it just gets lost along the way because you don't have the main person kind of spearheading the initiative. So I really wanted to be in charge of my company. I wanted to have that equity, and I wanted to make money. Disabled people are allowed to make money. I just had a post about this yesterday, but I'm really getting sick and tired of, I'm sure Diversability experiences this all the time, but my DMs are full of able-bodied people who want free consultation, that want free graphic design, that want free video editing, that want all these services from the disabled community. But that's what it is. It's a service. I'm a professional and you need to pay me. And even the disabled community is guilty of wanting free services because they're like, you're disabled, you need to help me. And hey, I'm here to amplify voices, but I'm not here to be taken advantage of either. My friend who's a director who works for the Easter Seals Film Challenge, he's like, yes, I understand you're disabled, I'm disabled, but I've got to eat. I've got to eat too. I've been on SSI, I've been in the systems, I know what it's like, friend. Like, I get it. We've all been there, but come on.
We can't empower our community if we're perpetuating the systems that oppress our community.
Thank you. That's a beautiful way to put it. Yeah. And I just saw a tweet the other day. It's like, disabled people, like, okay, so yes, I was on SSI for 27 years, which there's a whole guilt that exists being a disabled person on SSI, am I right? But like, there was a tweet like, disabled people are allowed to spend our money on frivolous things because of the stereotypes and the stigmas that exist. Like, even I get told I'm a CEO, I work and I work and I work, which I want to make another clarification. I also work nonprofit. I also work social services. I do contract work. I'm an educated grant writer. Of course, I'm working for nonprofits and doing graphic design. And because you can't really sustain yourself just as an entrepreneur. My sources of funding are doing conferences and selling merchandise. And that's not a lot of money. So I work for a lot of other agencies, which I won't disclose all of them, but yeah, if you're willing to pay me for work, I'll do work. Like, that's what people don't get about entrepreneurship. It's not like you never work, like you're working all the time and you have to really care about what you're doing because all I do is work.
Absolutely. It is definitely its own lifestyle. It's its own kind of way of life, and you have to really be intentional about choosing that life. Jacob, do you kind of get a lot of assumption about being an entrepreneur and being a service provider as a disabled person? Do you deal with a lot of that stigma, or has your kind of crossover between the two sectors been a barrier to some of that with you and your experience?
First off, I love everything that Erin said, especially that she's a fan of Gary Vee. I got turned on to entrepreneurship very much by him. And even he was like, there's nothing wrong with starting out doing stuff for free. But he also said, like, then you got to get paid, right? Like, don't be afraid to up your price, 3, 4, 5x, whatever. So I totally agree with you on that, Erin. I'm not exactly in the same boat as Erin. I'm actually having more of a difficult time with segmenting my market because like before I was helping all job seekers, right? Disability or no disability. So now sometimes I have trouble segmenting, like, yep, I only help job seekers with disabilities. I don't really want to leave anyone out, but I'm trying to like create a niche, for myself. So sort of a different problem than what Erin mentioned. But yeah, I mean, people DM me, they see artwork or whatever, and like I have a graphic designer. They're like, hey, can you make me this? I'm like, I want to be like, do you work for free? It's like, I don't know. I think that a lot of people, when they do that, it's like they're not being self-aware, or they don't have empathy, or they don't have, understanding. So yeah, I mean, I've had certain scenarios, maybe not exactly the same as Erin, but yeah, mine is more like I'm trying to just target's not the best word, but just identify people with disabilities, because that's like my market. Maybe I have to segment it even more for, people with learning disabilities, or because there's so many different disabilities,
Right.
Like right now I have a client with Asperger's. That's a whole different, list of needs versus like somebody with a learning disability. It's very different.
Right.
But just like anybody, whether they're of typical development or atypical, everybody has a different story, and I think that's what gets me so amped about coaching people. It's because everyone's got a different situation, and like a musician, you got to do a lot of improving, right? Because everyone's got a different scenario, and you have to like switch gears immediately. I mean, it's entrepreneurship. You're constantly like switching gears and wearing 7,000 hats. But I mean, I like it. I mean, like Erin said, versus, working in the public sector, it's very like, a lot of it's very square, like we do it by the book. We can't color out of the lines, and I'm still working in the public sector, and a lot of things that they say, I'm like, F this, like I could do it way better. But I play nice, and I give input where I can. Sometimes I don't want to rock the boat. It's exhausting. I know I can, but I don't want to. So yeah, that's where I'm at with that.
So I want to follow on question with you, Jacob, because you working as an entrepreneur and in the private public sector, still so very closely. You talked about not wanting to rock the boat and how exhausting for every marginalized community, but I feel like particularly for the intersection of disabled people. We're the only community that you can become a part of at any time. And we have people in our community from every other marginalized intersection. And I think that's a beautiful and really unique thing about our community. And, for the public sector, we talk so much, especially this month, about how exhausting of a process it can be to get accommodations in the public and private sector, and the traditional work, trajectory that so many of our clients are, attempting to break into. And I'm curious, Jacob, having been a career coach for the disabled community, do you very strongly advocate for, changing that system? Or do you really think that for our community in particular, entrepreneurship is kind of the new horizon for opportunity, especially with the digital age booming and the rise of the online business? Or do you think the future of accessible work that our community talks so much about is really going to be a hybrid? Where do you see that going, Jacob?
Great question. I kind of see it as a snowball effect. And I think the pandemic, in a lot of positive light, has perpetuated that. Because, for people with disabilities, I can't speak for everyone, but like for me, it's kind of empowered me. Because I definitely need some accommodations, modifications, like extended time on tasks, certain stuff like that. I've never felt more liberated, right? To be able to do that in the comfort of my own home That's amazing. Whereas I have to like ask for it at work, and I have to have a meeting about it with all these people, and they're looking at me. And Erin kind of said it perfectly, because she said, I believe, I'm paraphrasing, but like when you went into an interview, right? You're on the phone, they looked at your profile, they were so impressed, blah, blah, blah. And then when you went in and papers dropped or whatever, a totally different reaction. And that's kind of how I definitely resonated with that as a person with an invisible disability, because I just walked in, they didn't think of anything, whatever. And then once I checked that box, right, I get the phone call, we have to have a meeting, blah, blah, like they had no idea, it's not something I wanted to do. It's something I need to do to level the playing field. So yeah, I totally, I think it's moving forward, if anything, especially with the pandemic. I think people with disabilities, like this is nothing new. Us working from home, like this is nothing new. I think if anything, it's empowering people with disabilities. I think when you have a disability, you're constantly problem solving, whether you're an entrepreneur or not, because a problem that you may have internal or external, you don't always have time to go to a doctor or get medicated. You have to problem solve right there. So I think since, I can't speak for everyone, but like since birth, like you're always, or whatever the case may be, you're always like problem solving little micro, macro problems. So I think people with disabilities, it's like power in numbers. I think it's only getting more supportive.
This brings me to my last segue. I know that we all could talk about entrepreneurship and the disabled community for literally hours and days, but I think that our listeners could probably do like a year's worth of episodes on this alone, which is fantastic. But unfortunately, I don't have that much time in one episode. I think that the Zoom gods would absolutely strike lightning on me. But I do want to, kind of segue about a lot of the things that you guys talked about. We were kind of chatting before we started recording about content and the importance of the digital space, with not only the advocacy that each one of us do, Diversability does, I do with my own business, you guys do with yours, that we're kind of coming into a new age for disabled employment, and not only disabled employment, but action on empowering others to help move our initiatives along. So something that I personally talk about a lot with my clients who are predominantly non-disabled, marketers and business owners. I work with, business owners to help make their content accessible, because it's not only an effort of our community that's going to move employment opportunities forward. It's really those outside of the disabled community that are going to help push this forward. And because so much of what entrepreneurship has become in the digital age, with content and education and advocacy and being authentic and all of those things, and starting these important conversations, I'm really curious to hear from you guys about what the digital space means for your business, and how you think that the work in that space that entrepreneurs in our community do can help empower the employment opportunities for our community, regardless of whether it's in the entrepreneur sector or another sector. What do you think the role of digital content is in those initiatives for us? I'm going to let whoever wants to talk on this first go, because I know that was like the most loaded question ever.
That's a loaded question, but it's a good one. I don't want to cut Jacob off if he's just Jones to tackle this, but Are you good if I go?
Yeah, of course. Go right ahead.
Perfect. Well, as somebody who is predominantly a digital entrepreneur, I'm gonna go with my boy Gary Vaynerchuk on this one, which I hope to be on his talk show. Tea with Gary Vee one of these days, where I'll be saying that exact thing to him. I think digital entrepreneurship, particularly for the disabled community, is the most empowering tool we literally have. Because I don't know about you, Catherine, or you, Jacob, but I have seen a ridiculous shift in the disabled community. And I have been like in the disabled community, like we start seeking out others pretty early on, but I was born in the 90s. I'm an oldie. Like I didn't have all this representation that we have nowadays. So all these disabled influencers and these disabled advocates and all these people writing books. You have Emily Ladau, you have Andrew Gurza, you have all these folks that I've interacted with that have personally impacted my advocacy and the way I view my disabled identity. And it's a ridiculously powerful thing for me, because out in the real world, okay, I walk slowly. I take the bus to get from place to place. There are barriers that I am dealing with on a daily basis. I am also a disabled person who has depression, clinical depression, which the majority, I think it's like, I can't remember the statistic, but it's like 65% of all people who experience mental illness also have a dual diagnosis of a physical disability. But when you're dealing with all those barriers, it was exhausting to get up every single morning, get on the bus at 6 a.m., ride the bus for 3 hours into the city, go to an office, sit and do my job, which I could have done virtually, by the way. And because grant writing, fundraising, donations, it's all virtual, right? I don't know if you guys are familiar with like platforms like Donor Drive, Salesforce, Razor's Edge. It's digital. These are digital databases that there's really no reason to have an in-point person in the office unless you're directing volunteers, which at one point I was directing 75 volunteers virtually for a virtual walk, which was revolutionary. Honestly, like the pandemic was like the weirdest thing, because for all those years I was saying, what if we cut costs with the walk by making it virtual or creating virtual opportunities for disabled donors? And it was always no, disabled people don't raise any money. Board members don't say it like that, but anyway, basically what it boiled down to. But then when a global pandemic happened, whoa, we cannot have a large gathering. So my walk would have up to 600 people from the Johnson County community, from all of our areas. And we were not allowed to have large gatherings. So yes, it had to be virtual. And I'm just saying, if you need to make that accommodation for it to be virtual, you can make it. And for anyone listening who is really on the fence about entrepreneurship, guys, I've been there. I'm a product of the system. I've been on SSI, I've been on Medicaid, I've done it all. Like I've had to go within the income guidelines, and I deal with government on a monthly basis. I won't talk about all the tail end of that, because I think the reason why I wanted to get off of SSI so vehemently is because of the societal views we have about disabled people taking assistance. I mean, I was in college and people were calling me a lazy piece of crap. Like, it's just like, it's ridiculous how people view people with disabilities and how people view disabled people who are on the system. And you have to think, like, if you're making more money on the system and your income guidelines aren't allowing you to make the money to even compensate, you have to understand why disabled people are like, I don't want to deal with all of that, because even when you get out into the workforce, they don't hire you anyway. So, like, I'm just saying, for a disabled person on the system, yes, there's ticket to work. Yes, disabled people can work within their guidelines, but the reporting and everything is so ridiculous. And again, I don't know how political you're allowed to get, but it all comes down to this idea that disabled people are lazy. Like, if we're on SSI, we're just living on the system. As somebody who works 60 plus hours a week and is constantly working, disabled people, I don't care what you say. I've never met a lazy disabled person. We want to work, we want to contribute, even if it's just in a volunteer role. Some of my volunteers were some of the most dedicated, excited people. And again, like, we're entrenched in these systems. And I got out of the system and I'm still entrenched in the system because of all the red tape, because of the penalties that exist. And unfortunately for me, I was a very independent, disabled person. I'm like, I'm going to do this all myself. I know what I'm doing. I'm smart. I have a college degree, which I don't even use now, so it doesn't even matter. But like, I was that kind of attitude about it. I can do it all myself. And please, 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 if I can give you any kind of wisdom, please talk to your local vocational rehabilitation office. If you're not familiar with your local vocational rehabilitation office, send me a message. I will figure out where your local office is and have people who are trained in getting you off of SSI and Medicaid help you get off of SSI and Medicaid. Because if you're on the other side where you end up getting penalized, which a lot of disabled people do who are on the system, the statistics are like 85%. But it's just use the help. And again, I was always like, I want to get a job myself. I want to have my own merit. I don't want to use a vocational rehabilitation counselor to get a job for me. But that's not what a vocational rehabilitation counselor is. They are leveling the playing field, as Jacob says. Like, they are making it, like, they are directly contacting that employer and saying, hey, this is a case where you can hire a disabled person and work with us. And I probably would have had the discrimination issues that I had if I would have gone through vocational rehab, if I didn't have those stigmas and stereotypes of like, oh, I have to do it all myself. But we are disadvantaged as disabled people. There was a study by Rutgers University, I think in like 2015, you can put in the comments. But like, so Rutgers University, they sent out a resume where they have like a really overqualified disabled person.
Yeah.
But they disclosed their disability in the cover letter. And then they had a not so qualified able-bodied person who didn't have as many qualifications. And like, guess which resume got sent back? The disabled one. And again, guys, let's not fool ourselves. I've literally had conversations with board members that are like, granted, I do live in Iowa, so it might just be a Midwestern, but they're like, yeah, we were afraid to hire you because we're pretty sure you were going to sue us. Like, I'm just like, I mean, there's just so much. And again, as a disabled person, I never felt like I could ask for accommodations because I didn't want to make any waves because I was so desperate for a job. Like, I was like, I'll take anything. And you're afraid to ask for the accommodations and the things that you really need, at least for me, because I'm like, here I am, like a college graduate, and I've submitted like 250 resumes. And again, like, you just get your hopes up, like when somebody like calls. But anyway, it doesn't matter. But if you do want to be an entrepreneur, you can do it. I encourage you to do it. I'm not gonna paint a pretty picture for you though. I'm really not. Tiffany knows I'm not that kind of person. It's hard work. Like, it's not easy. You have to have a million side hustles, as Jacob says, to even keep yourself afloat. Fortunately for me, I have a lot of skills. I have tech skills, I have video editing, I have grant writing. Like, I do a lot of jobs. But if you don't have those kinds of spoons, or, you know, that kind of ability to do a million things, I'm just saying this has been my experience with entrepreneurship. I would like to do consultation like Jacob is doing here, but I'm just too busy trying to keep myself afloat. So it's hard work, but you guys can do it, and you can do it with your SSI guidelines. Please talk to your vocational rehabilitation counselor if you're going to get off SSI. I've had this conversation with so many disabled people. They're like, oh man, I should have listened to you. And I'm like, yeah, I'm on the other side of this. Trust me, listen to me. Like, the government is not on your side with SSI. I'm sorry, they're just not. And we have to be really cognizant of that as disabled people. We have to understand, you know, just because somebody puts a sticker on their business that says they care about diversity and inclusion doesn't mean it's real. Sorry. Sorry, not sorry. Like, I want to see performative junk. I want to see real actionable steps, like Jacob's talking about LinkedIn. I want LinkedIn to give me a breakdown of how many disabled people they're actually, you know, employing, but it's hard to get those statistics again because people don't want to disclose. It's a vicious cycle. I went on a tangent there. I apologize.
It's a difficult process, but so many, you know, you talked about the fact that the entrepreneurial spirit of our community is exploding. And I think that you're right in so many ways that that's how we're going to finally break these cycles. Jacob, do you kind of agree that entrepreneurship and the digital space has a unique opportunity to help break these cycles for our community as far as employment goes? Where do you see that as an opportunity? Where do you see the digital space coming into play with these initiatives?
More now than ever before.
Can you elaborate on that? I know that that's like such a concise way to say that, which I appreciate.
Nice.
Very, very concise. But can you elaborate on how you really think that the digital space is going to shape the initiative to empower disabled employment?
Yeah. So it's very binary, like Gary Vee says. It's the fact that it's opened up a whole different landscape for this community to be able to do work from anywhere in the world, and to actually do what you want to do instead of what is, the market is the market, but you can actually find a skill and find someone to pay you for it. as opposed to the other way around where you have to look for work. I think that the market has totally switched gears a lot. So I think there's an abundance of opportunity, but I think it's also a mindset shift. You have to see it that way. And I think that's the big difference. And I think people with disabilities have this opportunity to dominate the market
in a way that we never really have before. And I definitely agree with you that, you know, as we begin to break down some of those barriers that we've had for so long, we have a chance to actually do the work that we want to do and break the stigma by literally proving that we've been able to do these things all along. And at the same time, the digital space presents its own unique barriers and challenges, but I'm encouraged to see that advocates and entrepreneurs are also already addressing that. Jacob, have you seen that for yourself, that that's becoming part of the solution, or do you think that it's going to create just other new unique challenges for our community? Or do you think it's both at the same time?
I think it's both. Challenges are inevitable for this community as well as for entrepreneurship. So it's not surprising with that there will be new challenges, but I think there's going to be so much more growth as well.
And that's, I think, what we're all aiming for, whether we're working in nonprofit, whether we're working a 9 to 5, because 9 to 5 work is noble work as well. I know that we highlighted entrepreneurship today, but no matter what kind of work you choose to do as a disabled person, that's important, because doing the things that you want to do and living the life that you want to live is what we're all about. I think we can all agree on that. And I want to thank you guys for coming on today and having this conversation about your own entrepreneurial journey, the importance of entrepreneurship in your lives and with the people that you work with and our community, because these conversations are really how we truly move that needle forward. Before we sign off, does anyone have anything else you would like to add today to this conversation?
Jacob, do you have anything?
I love these types of talks. They get me amped up. So I just want to say thank you to Erin and Catherine for this opportunity. Appreciate it.
That's what we're here for.
And I want to say thank you to Diversability, because I really do think you guys are on the forefront of disability advocacy and really making it something that can be globally recognized. Because I think one of the biggest disconnects with disability content, as myself as a disabled graphic designer, is we need to make sure that we're appealing to the able-bodied community as well. And we need to make, and you know, as much as like Jacob's talking about, like having niche content, you know, niche content for TikTok and for the algorithm and things like that, like overall, it's like Catherine says, like the chances of you becoming disabled as a person, like is a high chance. So it's like, and our lives are not like a cautionary tale. I, you know, hope that you guys see claiming disability and you see like pretty disabled and powerful, and you feel empowered by that message. I don't want people to feel fear as a disabled person, because even as odd as it sounds, like as a disabled person who's been disabled as hell all of her life, it has taken myself like 27 years to get to the point where I embrace my disability. So like disability pride and like embracing it, that's a journey. Like that's not so you don't just wake up and be like, I'm pretty disabled and powerful. Like, ooh, like because of the societal barriers that exists with disability. When you think of disability, even the word itself, you're thinking about it in a negative connotation because of the pity narratives that we have about disability, that our lives are so sad and depressing and all of this stuff. Like, that impacts people, and they're like, oh my God, I'd rather be dead than be disabled, which is something people often say. And there's so many advocates, even if you're not following me or not following Jacob or not following Diversability, the goal is to make people understand the disability is not scary. You can feel empowered by your own narratives. As somebody, who grew up in an abusive family where my disability wasn't viewed as something positive, even if you're in a place where you're like, oh, I never want to identify as disabled, that's ugly, that's this or that, like, you can feel empowered by your disability. I never thought I'd wear a shirt that said pretty, disabled, and powerful, but here we are, because you feel empowered by it once you realize it's not a bad thing, and there's so many people going through similar experiences. It just really is empowering. I love being in the disabled space. It's a fun place. Sometimes it's a sad place, but disability is a human experience.
Yeah.
Like, it's a sad place, it's an angry place, it's a sexual place, like, it's all the things, because disabled people are people. Disabled people are humans. Like, disability is part of the human experience. So again, it's not here to be scary. We're not here to be overly positive. We're not here to be overly negative. We're here to just explain our stories and explain it in a way that's hopefully relatable.
And I think that's the power of entrepreneurship. So thank you guys so much for joining us for this conversation. To our listeners, thank you for being part of this amazing community that we've built together. And we look forward to seeing you next month for our November episode.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.